So the Xbox banner broke, so yeah, you're not gonna be seeing that anymore. Which sucks. So now you've got to see my unsightly corners. That is so much fun. I love that. I love when a video just comes together, not having a great week. Or year. Really. It's been a year. Fight Night Round 3 time! With the release of new, more powerful hardware, developers try to see just how far they can push things that they couldn't do on previous consoles. When EA made Fight Night 2004, the goal was to do all of the things that they wanted to do with the Knockout Kings on the PS1 and N64 without being confined to the hardware limitations of those systems. And while Knockout Kings saw 2 releases on 6th generation machines, they still felt very much akin to what was available a generation prior. Fight Night was an attempt to make the best boxing game ever made, with more realism and immersion than ever before. They wanted you to not feel so much as if you were just pretending to box, but actually feel as if you were boxing. And while Round 2 was a good game, and I tend to flip between whether or not it's better than its predecessor, it's still very much a game made for the 6th generation. It doesn't feel wildly different, but Fight Night Round 2 came out in early 2005. And want to know what else came out in the tail end of 2005? This thing, the Xbox 360. The Xbox 360 was Microsoft saying, "The next gen starts when we damn well say so," firing a direct challenge at Sony's PS2 and beating its successor to market by almost an entire year. EA capitalized on this by putting out brand new HD versions of their NBA, Madden, and FIFA titles, as well as Adultery Simulator 2006, which I hear included a minigame where your wife smashes your windows with a golf club. Sadly, you had to pay a monthly subscription after the Divorce DLC came out. The one thing missing from the system's launch was a brand new Fight Night. But it wouldn't be long before EA rectified that, with Fight Night Round 3 launching on the PS2 and PSP and the original Xbox. And hey, there he is. There's our boy. There's our new HD champ. Go on, tell us all about Halo 3. Now the big issue here is that Fight Night 2004's whole thing was getting away from what boxing games were on older consoles. They wanted to push the envelope and do all that crazy stuff that the PS1 and N64 could have only dreamed of doing. And for the third game in this series, meant to bring innovation to a fairly niche subgenre, is very much just the previous game with some minor changes. And this goes doubly true for the PSP version, which, fun fact, prior to this review, is the only version of Fight Night Round 3 that I had played. 6 years after it was relevant, so I'm on top of things. I didn't even play it on a PSP, no, I played it on my Vita so I could crudely mimic the right analog controls. It wasn't good at all, but it was Fight Night on the PSP and Vita. But hey, it's not like not being relevant has ever stopped Electronic Arts. I mean, they put out a new Mirror's Edge in 2016, long after people stopped caring about a game that very few people cared about to begin with. So, after a whole year of being available on literally every console that can't play Cubivore, EA spat it out on the PS3 and decided to throw in a whole bunch of bells and whistles, as well as removing Mike Tyson's favorite snack from the roster. And that's the version we'll be looking at today, Fight Night Round 3 on the PS3. Now, I do have the 360 and PSP version, so let's take a quick look at the PSP version. Imagine Fight Night Round 2, but bad and on a small screen. And there we go, it's my review of Fight Night Round 3 on the PSP. Now we can look at a version on a console that actually matters. For starters, let's talk about the visuals. Hot damn, this looks fantastic. Like, can you believe this is the PS3? If you put this up to late PS3 and early PS4 titles, it really doesn't look too outdated. For 2006, this game was quite the looker. You even have more realistic blood, sweat, and swelling on fighters, making it seem all the more immersive. And speaking of immersion, Fight Night Round 3 offers a brand new PS3 exclusive first-person camera option, appropriately titled In the Ring. Now, while this mode is cool, and I'll go over why later when I get to the career mode, it is only on the PS3, and even then, only in single-player modes. The controls have remained largely untouched, and except for the inclusion of 2 new types of punches, which the game refers to as impact punches, not a lot has changed. Now, impact punches are done similarly to the haymakers in round 2, which are also here. You go to do a punch, but you go a little further down on the right stick than you would for a haymaker, then follow through with the motion to fire it off. These 2 punches are the flash knockdown and the stun punch, and honestly, I swear these 2 inputs are the exact same, and the punches take forever to even wind up, leaving your ass open for a paddling.
And let me tell you why that's stupid, especially on the PS3 and PS2. See, the PS2 and 3 had analog face buttons. Yeah, analog wasn't just for sticks back then, as did the original Xbox, which this game is also on. So that means out of 5 versions, only 2 didn't have access to these. So, majority rules, why the hell did they not map these punches to the pressure-sensitive buttons?
This is a thing I will never understand. It can't be because of overlapping inputs, because as we'll learn once, or if I ever cover UFC 4, EA is not shy about making one button do multiple things. And in this case, the controllers you're likely to be using to play Fight Night Round 3 are actually designed to do this, unlike the DualShock 4, which is not. I never did find the right time or opening to use them, save for on parries, and even then the timing for them isn't lenient enough to make these 2 punches viable. You can maybe get lucky enough to land them by accident, but for the most part I just never found much use for them. They probably do have a time and place, and I'm just too stupid to actually know when or how to use them properly, but you can do maybe 3 hooks in the same amount of time it takes to fire off one of these babies, and do more damage for about the same amount of stamina. And also weirdly, we're right back to the analog controls being more akin to 2004's, where they aren't quite as responsive as I'd like them to be. What this culminates in is a control scheme that is either not ideal to play with in the form of the total punch controls, and a control method that functions far more reliably, but at the expense of not having access to those 2 new punches that I mentioned previously. And the worst part is that since those 2 punches aren't super useful and are just worse versions of signature punches, you have zero reason to actually use the analog punching controls whatsoever.
May I remind you that those controls are the game's selling point. It would be like releasing a new Call of Duty, but with no online multiplayer. That's part of the reason people buy them. Although I think EA would still be able to move a few copies of Fight Night, considering that at this point in time, they were the only boxing game in the ring.
And sadly, EA knew that. They knew that they could half-ass things and people would still buy it because they don't have other options. It's why UFC 4 sucked so much. Like what? You're going to wait for 2K to make an MMA game? Of course not. They won't touch it. EA makes the only combat sports games. And while there are attempts from indie devs to make combat sports games to compete with EA, they ultimately aren't going to get very far because it's a fairly niche market to begin with. And if anyone was going to actually compete with EA, it would have to be another major developer. And speaking of half-assing things, the career mode. This has to be the laziest fucking career mode I have ever seen. It's just Fight Night Round 2's career mode with the exact same training minigames that work the exact same way. And the worst part is that just like Round 2, you can select your trainer between fights, focusing on speed or power. The issue is, you still have access to those same training minigames when I feel like having different minigames for each trainer would have been a better idea. Like for speed, why not have the combo dummy, jump rope, and the speed bag? Well, for power, it would be weightlifting, tire flips, and the heavy bag. And while on the topic of weightlifting, the fact that they went with bicep curls over something more functional is something that has bugged me for a while. See, when training for boxing, weightlifting can have benefits. Exercises like squats, bench press, and deadlifts can all help build explosive power needed for punching. And on the topic of building shoulder endurance, you have a whole myriad of shoulder press variations that they could have put in. The problem is that while having a good pump is great and all, your biceps aren't super important when it comes to boxing. They're just for intimidation. The function of the bicep is to pull, which you're not doing in boxing, or at least you shouldn't be. If you've got 32-inch pythons, sure, whatever. Loads of guys in MMA and boxing are jacked. Look at Mike Tyson, look at Paulo Costa. I'm not saying you can't have some sick peaks, but the fact that EA picked bicep curls, machine-loaded bicep curls at that, which aren't quite as beneficial as some other variations, shows me that EA was aware that they chose the wrong exercise and only went with it because it's much easier to demonstrate and convey in a video game setting compared to something like, say, bench press or squats.
So, I have taken it upon myself to design for you, Electronic Arts, a new minigame. If you want to use it in a future Fight Night game, which we all know is happening any second now. Any goddamn second. Just any day they'll announce it. It'll come out alongside an actual Final Fantasy, I'm sure. It's free. You can use it if you ever get around to it.
The minigame I have in mind is squats, both because it's functional for boxing and because I wanted this game to have something in common with Final Fantasy VII. The goal of the minigame is simple: do squats while managing your stamina. Your fighter will stand under the bar, unrack the weight, and stand there. You, the player, slowly pull down on both analog sticks, which causes your boxer to go into the squat. There would be 2 meters on the left and right with an arrow in the middle. You would have to slowly tilt the 2 analog sticks down as the arrows drop, keeping in time with them. If you go out of sync with the arrows, then your stamina will begin to drop at an increased rate. If you run out of stamina, then the movement fails and your boxer is forced to re-rack and take a short breather to rebuild their stamina back up, losing precious seconds in the process. Your score would be tallied up after each successful rep based on things like timing and how much energy you have left. Your score would also be multiplied based on how close to failure you got. Your stamina would replenish between successful reps, but very slowly. This means that there would be a strategic element between going for that last rep to get more points and thus greater gains, but you also run a greater risk of gassing out and losing time. I designed this one to use the 2 analog sticks because that's what the weightlifting minigame used. But it's because it's a thing that every controller that this game can be played with has, save for the PSP, which would just keep the current weightlifting minigame because who cares? It's the PSP. And while you can hire a trainer, there's only now 2 to start with, and all of the other management elements like picking your entourage or your entrance music, that's all gone. So we traded in a deeper experience for just prettier visuals.
And boy, everyone that was telling me in my round 2 review that this was the best game in the series is probably going, dude, what the fuck? We thought you had our backs. We thought you was cool, man. Don't worry, here's some positives.
If we're just looking at this as a boxing game, no added bells and whistles, forget the minigames, forget the career mode, this could be the best Fight Night. Faster than the first 2, and footwork actually feels a lot more useful here than in past games. I never had issues cutting off opponents, and head movement is surprisingly great. It's still not Victorious Boxers 2 good, but it's good. I have to learn that Victorious Boxers 2 is a very niche game for a very niche market at the time of its release, and that not every boxing game needs to be like it. It did its head movement really well because it was fast and loose, and that was by design. That doesn't mean that round 3's more rigid, structured head movement mechanics are bad, just they're different. But the one thing that does bug me is that leaning into oncoming punches doesn't seem to actually matter. Like, you can lean into a hook and it will do the same amount of damage as it normally does. It's a small nitpick, but still. I also found parrying and blocking to be far more reliable in this game too.
And that's because of this version's exclusive feature, As mentioned, the PS3 version came a little later than it did on 360, and it even has different box art to reflect that, with the PS3 and 360 versions having Oscar de la Hoya's lovely face on the box, and Arturo Gatti and Mickey Ward sharing their own slice of the EA Sports curse on the PS2 and Xbox. Nobody cares about the PSP. I am sure that there's like one guy out there that bought a PSP just for Fight Night Round 3. He was like, ah, man, the DS is never gonna get Fight Night. It's probably for the best, to be honest. Multi-platform games tended to suck balls on the DS.
I actually really like when games have different covers for each version. Shout out to the Soul Calibur games for doing this right until they started to suck. I didn't mention it in my UFC Undisputed review, but in Canada, we actually got a unique cover with GSP on it instead of, the, Forrest Griffin variant that the rest of the world got. Which is funny, since the strategy guide is advertised on the back of the manual, and it still has Forrest Griffin on the cover. But that tangent aside, the game's PS3 exclusive feature is what you've been seeing thus far, the first person in the ring mode. And this option is fan-fucking-tastic. This makes Fight Night Round 3 all that much more immersive, and things like blocking and parrying now feel right. The only downside to this is that since you can't see your fighter's face, they had to find some other way to convey things like cuts and swelling. And the way EA attempted to accomplish this was by making the screen red, which I guess does demonstrate a loss of vision from an eye that's been swollen shut, but it also just makes the game hard to play. Like, not as in difficult, as in the game's too hard, it just makes it hard to see what the fuck is going on. It isn't a game breaker though, it is designed to be this way. And another benefit that I noticed with this mode is that it weirdly improved the frame rate. The last two games were a locked 60 during fights, and this one is, I want to say 30? I noticed a fair bit of chugging here and there, and wondered if it might be my capture software or my PC being stupid, but then I tested it out on my TV without the capture device or anything else, and no, it still chugs like a college freshman. But once I moved to first person, the frame rate got a tiny bit better. It still isn't perfect, but it is better. I don't know if the 360 version has this issue with the frame rate. I do know that a lot of PS3 versions of games sucked back then. Try playing Bayonetta on the PS3. Oh shit. May as well be playing it on the fucking Jaguar. But it's the one major thing that really holds this game back.
Well, that and the knockdowns.
2004s were great, 2s were fine, but 3s, oof. Big drop in quality. Not only do they feel less authentic, they aren't even as stupidly over the top as 2004's. Your opponent just kinda stops moving. Sometimes you'll get a good one, but I feel like I have the worst luck because I kept seeing the same few knockdowns time and again. Also, I had a weird amount of fights end with doctor stoppages early on. Although it does seem like someone's Bethesda-itis went untreated since coming down with it around round 2, because sometimes boxers will just do fucking whatever when they get knocked down. Hell, sometimes you don't even have to wait for the fight to start before seeing some absolute fuckery. Here's my boxer just doing the classic T-pose exercise. I think that's how Evander Holyfield beat Mike Tyson the second time.
Yeah, just go to your local gym. Don't pick up a single weight. That's for bitches, okay? Just stand there in a perfect T-pose. That'll get you fucking jacked. Who needs steroids or delt flies? Only pussies and weaklings like Arnold Schwarzenegger or Franco Columbo use those. Real men fucking T-pose. Technically, delt flies are T-posing. that is T-posing on hard. It's the Dark Souls of T-posing.
But the only thing more apparent than the lack of polish in Fight Night Round 3 is the product placement. This has to be the most aggressive product placement that I have ever seen in a game, at least of this time. Like, we're over here fighting for a fucking Dodge Ram? A Dodge Ram! They fucking name drop it. Worse, they say the brand slogan. Yeah, they aren't even hiding it. And your reward? You get a Dodge Ram trophy.
And I mean, it's so organic and unintrusive, just like today's sponsor, Chocolate AIDS.
Are you struggling to lose weight? Is dieting and exercise just not shedding the pounds? then buy some chocolate fucking AIDS. It tastes like chocolate. And shit. So you know it has to be good. It hasn't been sold since the 80s, so it's been left to sit in a warehouse for 40 years, and its name apparently sounds like the thing that killed Freddie Mercury. Which is bullshit. Because it doesn't sound anything like CIA. Chocolate AIDS. Lose some weight, you fat fuck.
I don't know why you cut back to me. I have no idea what the fuck any of that was about. God, the only way that this could be stupider is if you could unlock the Burger King mascot as a selectable trainer. That would be stupid. EA would never do that. That would break the immersion. Give me 1 second.
What the fuck does the goddamn Burger King know about boxing?
What the fuck? Who thought this was a... What the fuck does the fucking Burger King know about boxing? Who the fuck thought this was a good idea? Who thought, yeah, that doesn't look stupid or break the immersion at all? We just spent all this money trying to make a video game that tricks stupid people into thinking it's realistic, and then put the fucking Burger King in there for extra realism on top. Yes, layers upon layers of realism. Have it your way, bitch. My way is to not have the fucking Burger King teach my guy how to fucking box.
And of course, since this bothered me so much, I made him my trainer for the rest of the game. He, for whatever reason, focuses on training your heart stat.
Because if there's one part of the body that Burger King is good for, it's definitely your heart.
On top of boosting a stat, I just thought it was fucking hilarious and kind of sad in a way. Though this was around the same time as those shitty Burger King games, I think. Overall, there's nothing really great about career mode, and in some ways, it's actually worse due to the lack of depth. It also doesn't feel like I'm climbing any ranks. The one thing they did change is that you're given a couple contracts you can select from, and for the most part, I just picked whoever would give me the most money or popularity, with no consideration for if it would put me closer to a title fight. Although there are also times where you get rewarded for losing, even though it's pointless when the reward for winning is a much better option.
But now we get to my biggest complaint of the game, an issue that I had even on the PSP, one that was even kinda sorta present in the last two games. Parries. Oh boy!
Not how they're done or anything, but rather in how much the game relies on them. 2004 and 2 gave a lot of advantage off of parries, but not so much that it felt like they were cheap. But here, the game really wants you to abuse them. You can sometimes parry a punch, put the controller down, make a sandwich, go to work, come home, catch the misses with another man, hide the bodies, get interrogated by the police, go to prison for 25 years, then get out after only serving 10 for good behavior, turn your life around, go take a college course, take up a trade, meet a kind young lady that works at a diner, go on a few dates, find that you really have a connection. You get married, you have 3 kids, lose one to a brain tumor, put the other 2 through college, grow old with your wife, die peacefully in your sleep, wake up reincarnated as a sugar glider, come back to your old house, and you would still have enough time to pop off 3 shots before your opponent recovers. And this is even worse if the CPU parries your punch, because then your guy is just standing there getting his stupid Elder Scrolls NPC face knuckle-fucked harder than Jodie Foster spending the weekend at Floyd Mayweather's. Also, the Cutman minigame is back, that's cool.
Look, I am really not sure what to say about the career mode this time around. It isn't anything special or new, and it just feels like the last game's only worse, and, well, this is gonna be really weird to say, but there's actually another mode outside of career and versus and online, and yeah, that is, not a thing that I thought that I would get to say today, considering how much of this game is just recycled from the last one. I'm sure those people that told me that this was the best one are going to be really, really not happy to hear that. It's just round 2. Again.
And that mode is ESPN Classics, which on paper sounds a lot like the Ultimate Fights mode that the UFC games would eventually have, because it is. Essentially, the idea is that they took some of the greatest ever boxing matches in the sport's history, and this one, and allowed the player to experience and rewrite some of them. Hell, the Ali one even has a filter that makes it look as if it were old footage. Damn, that's cool. That is legitimately cool, and I had a stupid grin on my face the entire time. That is some good fucking fan service. The best part is that after beating career mode, one of your fights is also playable here, adding to the idea that your guy actually was a boxing legend and not just some creative fighter you shat out one day because you couldn't think of anything better. The rewards for doing these fights are just some more fighting styles for your creative fighter. I think that's actually kind of cool. I still would have preferred footage of the actual fights because back in 2006, that would have had a fair bit of value as a reward, but you know what, this is cool too. So things that I can use in-game, that's fine, whatever, that's cool.
And honestly, I know I kind of ragged on this game a fair bit, pointing out a lot of the issues I had with it, and it might seem like I didn't like it. But really, that's because I just think it's okay. It's not the best boxing game ever made. It's not the worst boxing game ever made. It's just a boxing game that exists, and I'm okay with that.
In all honesty, it's not a bad game. Just that the first two were, well, they're kind of better. The game definitely does have some cool stuff to it. Visually, it's stunning. If we were going just on the graphics, this is 100% a cut above. And it's amazing that even after 18 years, it still looks this damn good. The music kind of grew on me, which is weird because I hate rap, but it grew on me. The overall game feel is just much more enjoyable and closer to what I want, but then you get the weird glitches that happen, the inconsistent frame rate. I didn't even mention the fact that the load times can be almost 40 seconds. But the most egregious thing about Fight Night Round 3, aside from the product placement, is that it's just Fight Night Round 2 with Groucho Marx glasses. It has less career mode options and slightly better gameplay. It's still good, but out of the 3 Fight Night games I've played so far, this is the one I played the least, and I feel okay with that. I do like that it added at least one new mode, but it's just not quite enough to put it above 2. If anything, the 2 games are surprisingly equal. 2's career mode just barely beats out 3's, and with that being essentially a third of the content in the entire game, and what you'd most likely be spending a good chunk of your time on, it's hard to recommend this one over the games that came before it. Again, do not get me wrong, it's good. It's not the best boxing game ever made, and maybe it's not even the best Fight Night ever made. But that doesn't mean it's bad or that I don't like it, or that it's not worth playing. It's just that it's alright. And you want to know something? That's fine. Being alright is fine. I enjoyed it enough to finish a career mode run, but I don't think I'll ever be returning to this game anytime soon.
Which is why Fight Night Round 3 on the PS3 gets 3 copies of Fight Night Round 2 out of 5. Yeah, I wasn't even gonna build up to that. Just, drop it out there. Just throw it out the door. Why keep you guys in suspense? It's the same game. Well, that's 3 Fight Night games down, 2 more to go. That is right, motherfuckers. We are entering the championship rounds now. I say championship rounds, but that's not really a boxing thing. That's more of an MMA thing. Who cares? Our moms just call it UFC anyways.